Hello, everybody, and welcome to RHAP's coverage of The Amazing Race 37. We have officially kicked off in a major way. A season of surprises has begun. We traveled to Hong Kong, we danced, we sang, we climbed some stairs, but here we are to talk about the double elimination as we break down these 14 teams that turn to 12 by the end. And I can think of no better person to do it alongside. Listen, I am merely the rear end of this proverbial lion costume. And so right at the head is our chief Amazing Race correspondent, Jessica Liese.
Hey, Mike. I don't know if you're the lion butt. I might be the lion butt because you're the one that does the intro.
Yeah, true. But listen, oftentimes I talk out of my ass. So I think that's not necessarily, precluding anything.
I want the listening audience to know, like, if you're not watching this on YouTube, Mike is talking out of his face right now.
That's true. That's true. Let me show off what I've got going. Is I feel I'm going to see if she's a crafty queen this season. And I was trying to figure out what to do. So this is like my best Chinese opera wardrobe. And I will give the full presentation here.
Oh, my God.
This is what I've got. I made
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to describe this for the listening audience.
Please do.
I feel like I missed my calling as like one of those audio description people. So Mike is now doing some kind of bastardization of Tai Chi in the background here, and he's wearing a bathrobe. And then on his head, he has fashioned a paper headdress that is shaped like it's either a cardinal in a deep dive or an upside down maple leaf, maybe.
It's a Rorschach test, Jess. It's a Rorschach test. It's what you make of it.
Do I see a duck or a rabbit? I'm not entirely sure. And then he has written TAR 37 across the top of it right near his head, and it is tied under his chin with a large bow.
Yeah, so listen, the first of many, much like the first of many times we'll be talking about The Amazing Race. Of course, make sure you don't miss out on a second of our coverage. Go to WeKnowTheAmazingRace.com. Sorry, WeKnowAmazingRace.com. Drop the at this point. This is where you can get access to all the weekly recaps that Jess and I will be doing, as well as the exit press that Jess gets to do. And you talked with not one, but both teams that were eliminated this week, correct?
Yeah, I literally just got off the phone with them. Mike, this actually brings up a point that we got into this on Blue Sky last night, and I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with this, because we're starting to build something over on Blue Sky with the live tweeting of the episodes, but we're not tweeting anymore because we're skeeting, and I hate that, but I guess that's what they're calling it. But there was a question of what hashtag should we use? Is it hashtag Amazing Race or hashtag The Amazing Race? And I think we got to drop the definite article, Mike, because that's wasting characters. And
that's very true.
I'm gonna be posting to Blue Sky all season with the hashtag Amazing Race, and I encourage you all to do the same. And so therefore, when you go to our website with our feed, you can go to WeKnowAmazingRace.com, no definite article.
Yes, and so while we dropped some characters in terms of using the hashtag, we dropped a few characters as well when it came to this leg. Let's get into it, Jess, because there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, this season has been hyped up as the season of surprises. It hits the ground running and raining, I suppose, with this idea of the fork in the road, culminates with two teams going here. Now, you famously go onto this podcast and say that, in your opinion, the least entertaining episodes of a typical Amazing Race season are often its first and its last. Particularly when it comes to the first, it's just an idea of having to carry the weight of simultaneously introducing all these teams to us while also like putting an actual race together. So in your opinion, given those sort of standards you set up, how did the Amazing Race 37 premiere hold up for you?
I mean, I would say for a premiere, I thought it was very strong. I thought that we got enough of just about every team. I mean, we'll get into it. There were a few that were a little bit purple. But I felt like we got enough of everybody that I can more or less identify them. I can pick them out of a lineup. And we also, I think the fork in the road was a really great device as far as that went, which we'll probably have many detailed opinions about that new twist as we go along. But I felt like we had enough action. And I think that the design of this leg was such that we had the opportunity to see everybody in action, and it also added a little bit of suspense where a normal leg would not have had any.
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, it's that sort of like lowered bar of Amazing Race
Mhm.
premieres. I mean, listen, I love me some Jackie and Lauren. Was I disappointed that a lot of the climacticism was taken out of a good portion of this episode because one team seemingly fell behind from the jump and never caught up? Absolutely. But I guess this is where the fork in the road helps and that it's made up for in the other side of things, which like did have a lot of climacticism to it and back and forth and changing places. I would say in general, that was nice to see. Just that's something we love about the Amazing Race is that every leg is supposed to be kind of this blank slate of you never know where you're going or what you're doing, but there's a chance that even if you come in first place last time, you might be in last place this time and vice versa. And I feel like, we certainly got to know a good amount about the teams. I wouldn't say everything, and that includes, one of our teams that were eliminated this week, but we'll certainly have an opportunity to get to know a lot of them. And I mean, let's just get right into it with the fork in the road because I got the chance to talk with your friend and mine, Phil Kogan, in the preseason about this season. And he did say that while the fork in the road was a brand new thing, it's not going to be like, all right, every leg is going to be a brand new thing for the Amazing Race. In fact, it's going to be much more throwbacks to stuff from previous seasons. We saw in the sort of teaser to begin the episode a fast forward, an express pass. And so the fork in the road is more so the exception to the rule. So, Jess, let's take a look at this because I think this is the major talking point of the episode. How did you think the debut of the fork in the road went?
I think if we're ranking debuts of new Amazing Race twists, this has got to be up there because many times we put one in and it's a fail, either because they don't really execute it correctly or the racers don't take advantage of it the way that they're supposed to. But I feel like this was an easily explained thing. It didn't take Phil 15 minutes to tell us exactly what happens in every contingency. And it was playing off of something we already are familiar with because it was basically a glorified detour with a different outcome. And it had some interesting strategic elements that people discussed as we got into it that helped me kind of acclimate myself to it and familiarize myself with like what this is adding. So I think like in terms of new things added to the race, this one is a value add where not every new thing is.
Yeah, I would consider this a good start, I think.
Mhm.
And look, we've certainly seen twists in reality shows past where their debut is actually too much, that they throw in too much overload with this, and then
Mhm.
they kind of have to scale it back. This, they're more so slow rolling it of like,
Mhm.
all right, we're going to try it for, to your point, what ends up being at its core a limited stations detour, where it's, okay, 7 stations at Sing, 7 stations at Dance. It's just that unlike a detour, you don't have the option to go to the one that has the surplus and wait around for a station to open up. That's like once those 7 stations are locked in, they are locked in. And so, look, was I hoping that they truly would be on, as Phil said, 2 parallel races for the rest of the leg and not just have it be one task? Absolutely. I think it was unfortunately a little bit of false advertising, a little bit of a misnomer, though it's also a bit of a reminder to me as well of like, remember, this is the amazing race and they are operating within a certain budget. I think that certainly ends up being the answer when, old school questions are lodged as to why can't they do this anymore? Why can't they do that anymore? Spoiler alert, people, the answer is almost always going to be budget. But I think to your point, and what I am excited about for any new stuff that's coming is this idea of decision making and strategy being brought in. And again, The Amazing Race is not necessarily a show that huge strategy heads want to get into, nor do people necessarily like strategy on The Amazing Race sometimes. But here's sort of a fun example of it where it's being able to assess the board in multiple ways and figure out, in the case of like Courtney and Jasmine, for example, essentially save their own race by being able to look at the field and make an informed decision based on that, as opposed to, all right, just move on to the next task and hope you pass somebody.
Yeah, and especially when you get like a detour where they give you a limited amount of information. How many times, Mike, have we seen somebody look at the detour options and choose one based on the description and then find out it is infinitely harder than the other one and get screwed because of detour choice? This kind of takes that out of the equation a little bit. So you could have a slightly unbalanced detour and not penalize every single person who took the other one. I liked that quite a bit. I don't want to see it every time. I want there to be some randomness to it. I mean, Amazing Race is something that is dependent, like you can be physically strong, you can be smart, you can be good at travel. You also have to be a little bit lucky. So I don't mind if we mix it up a little bit, but I thought this was a really great way of showcasing two incredible tasks that were visually interesting to watch without, like, if that was a detour, literally everybody that was on the sing side would have checked in behind literally everybody on the dance side, with maybe
Right.
one or two in the middle mixing up there. And this made it so that they were both exciting and they were both okay choices in terms of not completely screwing your race and not putting you in danger automatically after you make one decision. So that was good. And I think it also gave us the opportunity to see both things, because also if you have two tasks and one of them is either boring or stupid or too hard, nobody takes it. Everybody just waits. To your point, they wait at the limited stations for the more fun looking one to open up, and then we don't get that either.
All right. Well, let's start unpacking this leg as these people pack up and head off to parts unknown. Starting line, we're back in LA, Jess, the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. Perfect timing with the Oscars here. I think some people in the new era of Survivor, Jess, for a while were reading into the Matt Chat edgic theories, right? Of like, oh, if a person's highlighted as Jeff talking to them on day one, that means they have a chance of winning. Do we feed into that with the Amazing Race? Because the three that get highlighted here in Phil's Get to Know Ya segment are Nick and Mike, Carson and Jack, Pops and Jeff, and Scott and Lori.
Well, I talked to one woman. That's good. No, I mean, the thing is, Mike, I think there's some truth to it. I think you and I, of course, have had seasons where we watch one episode and we say, that team's going far, that team is not. And there are seasons where you can just look at the cast photo and say, that team's going far and that team's not. But I think it's too soon to tell if that's what's going on here. Certainly, I think this was a good week for all the teams that you mentioned. And I think we could make an educated guess that we probably saw one of the finalists in that part. But also, I'm not accusing Phil of sexism, by the way. I'm sure Phil talked to everybody at great length, and this is who they edited in there. So,
oh yeah, as someone who just wrote about the Survivor 48 opening, where that was literally what happened, I definitely imagine so. But it's only a brief time in La La Land, as yeah, for the first time in a while, Jess, it's been not since the fall of 2023 that we have had teams traveling to Asia, and here we get it. We're going to Hong Kong. First time in Hong Kong, I feel like since 31 maybe?
Yeah, it's been a minute since we've been to Hong Kong, but there's still plenty of stuff that you can do there. And I think this was a culturally interesting leg that didn't feel repetitive given the other Amazing Race legs that we've seen here.
Yeah, so just a brief double check. Season 30 was actually the last time. So it feels like truly ages ago. And so everyone is going to touch down. We have the fun two-flight mechanisms. And again, what makes this premiere so fun is that it didn't feel as stratified as like, all right, it's 4 teams and then 10 teams. Almost immediately, due to this kind of wackadoo ferry schedule, things get a bit rearranged. You continue to do so. I want to talk about the weather, Jess, because the rain certainly had its bearing on a lot of these task-oriented elements. Is this something you like? Do you feel like the producers were liking this, that it added stakes to all the stuff they were doing?
Well, I think we have to remember the last time the weather had this big an impact would be last season. In fact, when we were talking about the leg where we saw Angie and Danny go out, the weather played a huge role in that we didn't really get to see a lot of. But I think it's always an unpredictable thing. Like, again, this is another thing it's really out of everybody's control. I think that certainly made a lot of tasks harder. Like, I don't know if Jackie and Lauren talked to you at all about this, but they spoke to me a lot about how those steps were not just a lot of steps.
Yeah.
It wasn't steps qua steps. It was the fact that the steps were marble and wet and they had no guardrails and they had backpacks on. I think the rain was definitely a wild card in that equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as we'll get to the climb as well. Again, like I don't think the climb necessitated or led to any specific outcome, but like the fact that it was super slick to get a footing on everything. Larry talked in my interview about like tweaking his leg as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it kind of ended up making it even more of kind of a chaotic mess than it was in general by just being an amazing race premiere. But yeah, we make a brief stop at the Buddha statue, and we'll get into, I think, the Jackie and Lauren stairs drama of it all later. But let's just get to our first roadblock, our first true blue task of the season. Jess, who knew that there was a bun scrambling competition in Hong Kong?
I am so disappointed in this task, Mike.
You wanted buns to be there? You wanted soggy buns?
Why are there no soggy buns? I ask you, you can't tease us with the fact that this structure is frequently covered in buns and make us think that people are going to be scaling a 50-foot high croquembouche, and then they show up and there are no buns. It is bun free. I can imagine it would have been pretty gross, and it might have been a safety hazard to have it covered in wet buns, but it was disappointing all the same.
Yeah, I mean, listen, instead of buns, we get bun boo, as it were, as it seems like they, I don't know, co-opted Eva from Survivor, asked her to bring over some more bamboo and made this like very high tower out of it. I guess this is like their practice station, though. I don't know, Jess, to your point, I would rather practice on something that's like of a similar material to the buns, like foam, something that would
Right.
also be super absorbent should there be any precipitation during my necessary bun scrambling.
Necessary bun scrambling. That's a hell of a band name. Yeah, I could see why they don't do that. I could imagine that the wet foam would not smell very good, but the wet buns probably wouldn't either. This tower, it was fine. It was a climbing thing. We have a lot of climbing things. There were some amazing feats of strength during
Yeah.
this. I think we need to call out Brett, the Cirque du
Yes.
Soleil performer who scaled that thing like a monkey climbing a tree.
Yeah.
All the way up to the top in like 0.3 seconds. But I also need to give a shout out to Pops, who did almost the exact same thing without using his legs for
Yeah, who
some
made the
reason.
job much harder for himself. I don't know if he was just showing off. Well, though also, apparently Mark and Larry told me that like Pops also had a bit of a bum leg, so like maybe it was almost out of necessity that he's like, I can't put too much weight onto it. But like, good lord, I mean, Jeff has touted the bicep size of this 64-year-old man, and probably will to Kingdom Come. But like, he showed it off immediately. Like, I don't know what the firearms policy is in Hong Kong. This guy smuggled some guns in and showed them off in his bun scrambling.
Yep. Yeah, it was buns out, guns out.
Yeah, no sun out though.
No sun out. But
yeah, so yeah, to your point, it was a pretty standard like climb to the top of this thing. The much more important thing to do was the fork in the road, and it's two quintessential by the book amazing race tasks here, Jess. We have dance, which is that you are performing an in tandem lion dance for a set of judges, or sing, which is you get made up in your best Cantonese opera realness and you try to perform something for the judges. And to your point, there was one task that seemed infinitely easier, and there was also one task that made for infinitely better TV, and they were not the same task.
that is a fair point, Mike. Although I don't have any notes for the lion task. I mean, it's a bog standard amazing race task. It had some fun moments, and I thought the lions were nice to look at. Like, it
Yeah.
really could almost suspend your disbelief and think this was an animal when people were doing it correctly.
Yeah, and I guess that was the point as well,
Yeah.
is that, with dance tasks, I feel like you are more, it's an easier task to kind of watch from home, because if they're not dancing well, you could kind of tell, at least by the judges' standards. And here in this case, right, the intention is to make it look like a four-legged creature. And so, yeah, when they're out of step or they're out of rhythm, it becomes a little bit more obvious. But yeah, to your point, even something as simple as like putting the lion head over the front person, but like when they hold the head up, you get a brief peek like, oh yeah, you're like a wet, smelly American right now. I forgot for a second. I thought you were a Chinese lion. Was fun enough. And we'll talk about a few teams that struggled, but it didn't seem like there was like necessary any flagrant flameouts like we've seen in past dance challenges.
Yeah, I thought an interesting artistic choice was to show the teams dancing next to the example lion and showing the steps that the example line is doing in perfect parallel with them so you could see exactly what they were doing wrong. I thought that was really instructive, and I thought maybe you might not have known that quite as well if you weren't watching it.
All right, well, let's go over to Sing, which had a lot more of the to do about it. And look, I very much understand these people will express that there is a reason why they're not on American Idol or The Voice. You know, they might sing in the shower, and that's the largest extent of their vocal proficiency. So I do not mean to punch down whatsoever, but God, Jess, there are very few things in The Amazing Race that give me more pleasure than like people trying their hardest during these singing tests. And especially to start the season off with one, for me, it was like getting dessert as the first course.
Well, I feel like there needs to be a box that you check when you send your application in. And the box says, by checking this box, I acknowledge that I am okay with someone showing me singing on national television.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a delight of tone deafness, to be completely blunt about it. And it's tough, you know, obviously they're dealing with different vocal ranges and they're trying to get the pronunciation right, but God, some of it just sounded like cats falling down the steps, you know, slipping down the wet marble. And I loved it. I loved it so much.
I mean, with no real reference point, like Cantonese opera, not really my wheelhouse. With no real reference point for it, I can't really begin to imagine like how close or how far off it is from what it was supposed to sound like. But my friend Chris, who is my OG Amazing Race buddy, we've been going to finale parties since 2007.
Whew.
His mother has a large collection of Cantonese opera, and he said that it was difficult for him to watch this task because it was giving him flashbacks to childhood when his mother would play the Cantonese opera records over and over. So I trust his judgment on this. He said they actually did better than you think.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that this is one of those tasks where it is harder than you may think, that you may think, okay, they'll give us a bit more of a pass here in terms of pronunciation, and maybe they did. The big box, Jess, that quite literally did not get checked for a lot of them was the performance aspect. And we see this sometimes with dancing and singing tasks as well, which is like, yeah, you might be technically correct as you can be, but like also enthusiasm counts for
Mm-hmm.
50%, if not even more, of the rubric. And what's interesting about this was that it was less so like put some energy to it. It was all about this very deliberate pacing. Like, for example, when the woman sings, you know, she sings these four words and she's supposed to kind of like smoothly glide across the stage. And you see someone like Lori, who again is very understandably in her head and is like, step, 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 you know, step on each word. And so to your point, the my signals of like when to judge someone came from the judges themselves when they cut to, you know, these judges giving absolute face in response to their languages being no, butchered, I should say. But I did think it was interesting that they really started this season off with like one of these kind of ticky tack singing
Mm-hmm.
tasks.
Well, and it wasn't just like enthusiasm and stage placement, but there was a hand motion that went with everything you said, and you had to hold your head exactly right. That was one of the pieces of feedback they got. Like your head is in the wrong direction. You didn't react to the other person. It's opera's acting, of course. But I thought this was a really, for me, and I don't know, Mike, you're much more of a performer than I am.
What
But
gives it away?
it's just conjecture on this part. But I have I was a musician at one point in my life. And when you're memorizing something, it sometimes helps to have a second thing that goes with it. Like
Right.
mnemonics, frequently you have you can associate in your brain one thing with another thing. It helps you move through the task more easily. And I felt like that this opera task would have done that because you hold your hand here when you're seeing this, you step on this beat, and you move your head at this beat, and it's almost like putting hand motions to a song. It's like a very sophisticated itsy bitsy spider.
Exactly. I mean, what I found so interesting about it is this sort of dual energy that was probably happening for these racers, where, again, especially in this first leg, they are running on nothing but adrenaline. It's just go, 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 go. But again, this performance, I would not say it felt like slow because, again, there was an intentionality behind stuff, but it was almost like sustaining movements. And so I'm sure what a lot of people struggle with, besides like, shit, I have to walk and chew gum at the same time, of like, make sure I'm pronouncing things correctly while also doing my movements, is that probably in the moment their mind is racing of like, I have to get through this, especially with certain teams that have a certain level of intensity to them. But the motion itself called for being very fluid and very deliberate and tranquil, that it just felt like this kind of my mind body, I should say, disconnect that, it didn't surprise me at all, Jess, that it took these people upwards of 3 to 4 times to succeed.
Yeah, I don't think anybody got it right on the first try.
Yeah. Though I will also say, one of my favorite low-key things in The Amazing Race is like production insisting that they bring challenge props or costumes to the
Mhm.
mat. Like you saw that it was actually said very offhandedly after the lion task. Somebody said that they had to keep the flared, fluffy pants on. For the sing task, they had to keep the headdresses and the makeup on as well, because the show loves Phil, elating people or crushing their dreams while they are dressed up in their most ridiculous garb.
Yeah, well, it did double duty actually, because it did that, but it also, like, Phil did not have to keep track in his head of which mat they're supposed to step on because he has a visual cue there.
Yeah. Do you think right now of any possible, if they bring back the fork in the road, like any paired tasks they could do? Like, again, this seemed very simple of like you could sing or you could dance. Do you want any sort of future similarly paired tasks in the future? Or do you really want, in the vein of a detour, two very separate tasks to pursue?
I don't think that this was any more similar or any more different from any average detour, to be honest. Like, they were somewhat related. They were both performance tasks that required costumes, and I see that's why they did it. But you could do this with any pair of tasks. You can give somebody a stupid costume prop to do literally anything, as well Mike.
Yes, exactly. Do you think if we get the fork in the road to return in the future, will they extend it to multiple tasks? Or do you think they'll sort of stick it in as like, well, sort of like the intersection, right? Which we'll get into next week, where back in its heyday, it was really only joining together for like 1 to 2 tasks and then splitting apart. That's what the fork in the road is going to be in the future.
Well, I think from a budget standpoint, again, we're trying to minimize the number of tasks here. But when it was first described to us, I thought, oh, it's going to be like that one leg of the race where they were in Thailand and they had to go, like, they chose two paths blindly, and it was a series of tasks that led them to the end.
Right.
And I think there was a cat cafe involved at
That's,
one
yeah,
point.
so it was the blind date season. Because I remember
Yeah.
that's when New Kids on the Block and boyfriend got,
Yes.
or husband got eliminated. Because yeah, it was the cat cafe, and then it was like the gondola, like boat. There was a boat task as well, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, there was I don't remember what the tasks were in particular, but I do remember we were very flummoxed by I don't even think they called it anything. They just like, you do this, you do that, and they didn't even call it this or that because this or that was already a thing. Um, it was it was very strange to me, and that's what I was picturing when I heard about this fork in the road. But I think it worked fine with one task. It's a spin on a detour, and I think that's okay.
All right, Jess, let's get into these teams. Before we do, you and I talked briefly on an episode of the Reality Flash about them, what to expect from them. I mean, this is on average the oldest cast in Amazing Race history. Unfortunately, we do end up losing 4 of the oldest cast members in the premiere. But now that we've gotten a bit of a sense as to how they're going to race, how do you feel about this group overall?
I think this is a great cast. I think there are not, 4 or 5 teams that I'm struggling to remember off the top of my head. I think we got a good sense of who most of them were. We have a span of different relationships. I think it's a very diverse cast in both in terms of backgrounds and in terms of personalities. And all of the archetypes that we know and love are there, of course, but I think these people are very much their own people. And I'm happy that I don't feel overwhelmed by 14 teams, which I thought for sure I would be.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of personality among this group. And it's tough because there are a couple teams that we'll get into who really didn't get a lot of airtime. But I feel like a lot of other teams even just had like small little random
Mhm.
moments for them. Like I'm trying to remember, like maybe it was Scott saying he was a male cheerleader, and you have Han being like, okay, yes, work. And it's like, all right, it's just like these random comments, or like Bridget saying, thank you next. Like, I'm just loving these little sound bites that people provide.
Yeah, or the girlfriend saying big sigh. That was one of my
exactly.
favorites.
Like people who are laying the ground for more sound bites down the line, in lieu of like some of these other personalities that were built out either due to just being sort of like at the front for most of the episode, having big moments or everything in between.
Mm-hmm. I think that being said, we had some stars this week. Certainly had people that got a majority of the screen time that really gave us insight that we did not have previously based on our simple, like literally, Mike, everything I knew about these teams going in was from an article by some dude on parade.com.
Yeah, some Jamoke.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into some of these people, because also said Jamoke did get the chance to talk with Phil Kogan after the cast was released, and he gave a little bit of like a teaser about each one of these teams that I think a lot of them certainly did play out almost immediately. And that starts with our number one team. And just so you know, for organizational purposes, to not confuse people, we're going to talk about all 7 dance teams first, and then all 7 sing teams. So even though the checking in was a little bit mixed, I think it just makes sense that we kind of split them in half here. And so let's start with our first number one team of the season, getting just a cool $3,000 to split between them. It is our resident gamers this season, Carson and Jack.
Yeah, well, Mike, I think it's important to note that you and I last night got to hang out with these guys a little bit because we attended their premiere party in Brooklyn, and really great guys, really fun. I think we haven't had a good nerd team in a little bit, like at least not people that are overtly nerds. Like I would argue that we had several nerds last season, but maybe the better term is these are geeky guys who are
Greg and John shaking in their boots right now.
Yeah. Yeah, they're nerds. These are geeks. I don't know. I maybe have it backwards. I don't know. What's the difference between nerd and geek, Mike? I don't know. Anyway, these guys are great. I love their energy. I love their friendship. They are seasoned. They're seasoned online personalities with a channel where they play tabletop games. Apparently, there's some really fun content coming up from them in this vein very soon. That's the scuttlebutt that I heard last night. And they just crushed it. Like they know their stuff. They're in good shape. They are smart. They are experienced with amazing race know-how. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are yet again going to prove that as much as physical strength and endurance can certainly help you on the race, it's not necessarily everything. They have that very fun back and forth where Carson says, or Jack says, well, we didn't come into the race with big arms. We came in with big hopes.
They got the BHE.
Yes, exactly. And so I think that, Phil outlined this to me as well, that like they're more adept than you might think on the surface, just thinking to your point, oh yeah, this is our stereotypical nerdy team. I mean, from the beginning when they're like, yeah, we know LA, we don't need to get directions to the airport. Like, first off, audacious AF in the opening minutes of $1 million season to be like, I think I know my way to the 405, but also proves that like, I think they are more naturally suited for the race than I think we may have realized. They maintain kind of that front of the pack position almost the entire time, with really the exception being when Jonathan and Anna were able to pull away due to that ferry for a brief portion of time. And it seemed like a lot of great stuff fell into their wheelhouse. They're setting a good pace early on. And so, yeah, I mean, it's tough to say, oh, these are the front runners immediately, given there's 12 teams left and all the Michigas that was going on with the fork in the road. But I think this is one of the most solid teams that proved themselves in the premiere.
Yeah, they are. They came out guns blazing, and they're proving that they're going to be contenders.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they are D&D streamers, and their roll from initiative was incredibly high, and they had a great performance check as well.
Yeah, really rolled a nat 20 with this.
Exactly, and don't worry, we're going to be making D&D references as long as these guys are around. So that's
as long as I have them. I only have like half a dozen, so I'm going to round.
We'll get you indoctrinated. We'll get you educated as a result of these guys. That's why you can watch their extracurricular activities. That's an excuse to do so, Jess.
Yeah, well, I was going to watch them anyway because it sounds fun as hell, and my son is a big D&D fan, so I'm starting to learn the ins and outs of it.
All right. Well, next up in this proverbial party, dance party, as it were, Brett and Mark. So yeah, Brett and Mark got to show off a couple of their, I would not say 5 whole tasks, but certainly in their wheelhouse, right? Between, to your point, Brett's simian-like capabilities on the roadblock, and then obviously the two of them having a lot of performance and in particular dance experience. We didn't see too much of them, and Jess, it looks like they already might be in a bit of trouble next week.
Yeah, well, you can't necessarily make any guesses based on the previews. Like they're going to play up everything in the previews, but I don't know if that means we should count them out at all because they were really solid this week.
Yeah, I think, not necessarily standing out in terms of personality in the moment, but this is what happens, especially early on in the Amazing Race, is like typically you either get a lot of airtime for being one of the first teams at a task, so you have to introduce it to everybody, or you get a lot of airtime if you're really struggling in the back of the pack. It's these teams in the middle that unfortunately kind of get the short end of the editing stick early on, and that's what we got from Brett and Mark, again, with the exception of like his ninja-like climb up that bamboo tower.
They had a moment. They had a moment, and I think that's about all you can hope for in the first episode because it's funny. It is like the opposite of Amazing Race episodes. Amazing Race cast members, you get to know and love the ones at the front and the back, and the ones in the middle you kind of struggle with at first. And I feel like it's the opposite with the episodes because the ones in the front and the back I can take or leave, but the middle, the meat of it is where we really get to know people.
And Jess, Phil did tease me that Mark is not afraid to speak his mind. So again, speaking towards, there's an edit yet to come with them.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
All right, next up in the dance task, we're going to get to a couple teams that unfortunately, again, sort of in line with Brett and Mark, did not get a lot to do in this episode. Ernest and Bridget, this is one of our parent-child teams in this season, father and daughter. The one thing I caught, Jess, was that he called her Bubblegum as she was climbing the tower.
Yeah, that was adorable. I liked that.
Yeah,
I think these will be.
Go ahead.
They will be fun to watch, and I'm here for a cute nickname.
Yeah, I hope, again, it seems like from the next time on, we'll see a little bit more of them. Unfortunately, it might come at the cost of like some struggles in the tasks themselves, but yet another solid team, if one that was not shown as much as the others.
Yeah, and I think like they got screwed in the color department because navy blue just blends into everything. So like half the time,
everything.
Yeah, I didn't know they were even there half the time.
All right, Bernie and Kerrigan, another team, I think. We go from, I guess, dark blue is purple in this aspect. I thought we were going to get, like, a good amount from them, considering that we got this confessional to start off, right? They were one of the first to give a confessional in this episode of Bernie being like, I'm the one that's usually more out there and go with my thinking, and she's going to have to rein me in. And I don't know, maybe Kerrigan did her job a little too well because we really didn't hear from them for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, and this was especially disappointing in light of the fact that I think going into the race, we thought they were going to be a standout team. And then we are teased at the beginning of the episode that they are going to be at the center of some of this alleged drama that is happening. You see them kind of having an argument, and it's weird. It sounds like they're speaking to each other, but they are looking off camera. So I don't know what's happening there.
Unless they're refusing to give eye contact to each other.
Yeah, maybe they're just like, they can't even look at each other at the moment, but something's going to happen with them. It's going to be a big moment. And we didn't get anything this episode that made me believe there's going to be a big moment from them.
These two are dragon boat riders. They're a sleeping dragon at the moment, and we'll see what wakes them up. Let's get into some more visible teams here. Let's talk about Nick and Mike, who, to your point, were some of the stars of this first episode, sort of built to us as like the super duper fans. Again, I'm sure this cast is full of them, but these are the guys that have been applying for literally several years. We got a snippet of a couple of their audition videos, and Jess, we also got to see a bit of a potential for mess as well. We love mess here on, I would say, non-problematic mess here on We Know Amazing Race. And they are already starting to feel the pressure a bit when it came to that lion dance.
Yeah, there was a moment that was far too tense for a premiere episode. But I have to say, this is a team, when Amazing Race has cast this type of team in the past, it has usually been at the expense of a personality, shall we say. We get these guys, they're like, they're brothers or they're best friends, or they were in the same frat or the same professional sports team. And I'm not throwing specific shade on any particular team here, but this is a team that we get a lot of. And a lot of times it's just like they give us, it's like, go on, girl, give us nothing. And a lot of times this team is like a team that we're casting because we know we need to have this type of team and not necessarily because they love the show. I love that we found guys that fit this mold, that have personalities, that are camera savvy, and that love the show. This is a great casting choice. I can't believe that it took them 7 years to get on, because I think if I was in casting and I saw a pair of guys like this who are good looking and personable and smart and in ridiculous shape, but also love the show, why did they not get cast on their first try? I don't understand.
I think as long as they are in the race, which look, they might be one of the more high variance teams if like this contentiousness and ability to crack under pressure continues.
Well, that also speaks to why were they not cast sooner?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they're bringing us what we want in an amazing race.
And especially with siblings, right? We have seen this, the tale as old as time of like, they know each other better than anybody else, including their own parents sometimes. And so like, they know how to push each other's buttons. But I feel like as long as they are in the race, they're probably going to be our biggest narrators. I mean, even getting like the soundbite from them, right? Talking about the weird thing about the fork in the road is that it halves, the season lengthwise, because now you're only competing among 7 teams. I think a lot of the surprises in this season of surprises are going to be narrated through them.
Well, these guys are podcasters.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They're like us, Mike. You and I would be the narrators of the season for the 2 legs we would last.
Thank you for being generous and saying 2. I don't know if we might put Jackie and Lauren to shame. We might be like, all right, we're done at the airport right now.
I'm assuming someone on our cast would get a terrible cab, but you're right. 2 is generous.
All right, let's get into, so Nick and Mike, they do fall fairly far behind. They struggle in the Lion Dance. They get out ahead of a couple teams, but it seems like maybe there's something going on with their cabs. And so they finish right ahead of Courtney and Jasmine, who have one of the more up and down legs of a lot of these teams. So Jess, again, the show forwards and backwards. There was a little bit of meta going on here with Courtney and Jasmine's struggles with their taxi that do end up getting explained, but they actually drop a piece of information that I don't think a lot of Amazing Race fans know about when they say like, oh, we didn't check the other piece of paper. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, I can actually elaborate on this, Mike. So we see people rip and read. They open their clue. Also, rip and read, apparently that's a thing now. We're going to open the clue, and you get the little folder. You open it up, and it says what the next thing is. And inside the folder, it'll say detour, this or that, or roadblock, or make your way to this. But that's what the camera will show. That's what the camera will show, and they'll read it out loud. And then there's another piece of paper behind that, and that's like a more specific list of directions. Like it is some typed out instructions that say, you will go to this place and you'll park at this entrance, and you'll go in this door. And if it is local language that, if it's a local language that's in an alphabet different from the Romanized alphabet, it will have the characters. So this particular instance, they are supposed to go to this park, and there are Chinese characters listing out the name of the park on the piece of paper, and everybody else was showing the cab driver this piece of paper that had these characters, and they could read it, and they knew exactly where they were supposed to go. This was one thing. This was the thing that they described on the air as being the reason that so many cab drivers were just flat out refusing to take them where they were going. But apparently there are some theories that maybe they were trying to get a cab in like the wrong place to get a cab, because every time one of those drivers said no, they kind of like made a hand motion to like across the street. So maybe there's a different area they were supposed to be getting the cabs from.
Yeah, I mean, there was also one that had said like, oh, I have someone that I need to pick up. So maybe they were accidentally like stationed outside like the Uber pickup, and these people were specifically outfitted to pick up other people. But yeah, that's the general sense as to what it seems like happened, was that they were sort of using the anglicized way to pronounce the park that they were going to, and these drivers just did not understand what they were describing. So they're like, I don't know where that is, so I'm not going to take you. It took seemingly umpteenth tries for them to be like, oh, okay, we can finally show this. But luckily they're able to prevail, Jess, because they kind of prove the abilities of the fork in the road by assessing the competition, essentially saying like, all right, look at all these white boys who are in this dance task. I think we could beat them on this.
Yeah, they weren't wrong. I love the savvy that took. And they made the best comeback, certainly, this episode. And they were really smart about how they went about it. And I think it really speaks a lot. They didn't panic. They didn't kind of decide they were out of it before they got too far into it. And I think that bodes well for their time on the race. And I want to see a lot more of them. I think they're really cool. I love their
Yeah.
relationship. They had some really great lines.
Yeah,
And
they're not looking to U-Haul right now. They probably used one to move in together though.
yeah, but that's the hilarious thing. Like they made the classic U-Haul joke, and then they're like, "But we do live together." So it's like you kind of did. Okay, that's kind of what you did.
Yeah, maybe more of a proverbial U-Haul of like moving together to a different place.
Yeah.
Maybe just one moved in with the other one. It's sort of like a temporary measure.
Yeah, it was not. It was maybe it was a literal U-Haul, maybe not a fully emotional one until much later.
Yeah, so I agree. I really like this pair, and I'm glad that they were able to showcase, like, it's always fun to see the Medal of Amazing Race teams when they are able to see what they can pull off when they are in the back of the pack, and some of the best teams don't need to. They got sort of the scare in them early on, and sometimes that does help teams. And so they were able to prevail here. Their gamble worked off. They finished above our next team here in Mark and Larry, and was able to, beat them to the pit stop by, from what Mark and Larry alleged to be like, only 45 seconds, it seemed.
They said that their cab pulled up while they were getting out of the cab.
Yeah, which is awesome. I mean, I would not constitute it as like a first leg foot race, but like pretty dang close. And maybe that speaks to, again, the 7-team split here, that we get half of them finishing within 1 minute of each other.
Yeah. Well, and you can see it because you can see, like, I think an easy tell is if the other teams are standing on the mat and Phil has not dismissed them yet, and he's like, "We'll bring in the other team," it was close because he's not. I mean, arguably they could make teams stand there for 15 minutes waiting around for the other team so that Phil could pretend that, but I don't think he does.
All right, well, let's dote on Mark and Larry a bit, because I would say, again, certainly compared to the other team eliminated, the lesser shown, they are personified to us as sort of the Mark and Bopper clones, right? Of like, have not been outside the country or maybe traveled a little bit. All we know is like what we've explored from our motorcycle club. Isn't this great? From what it sounds like, it really was just like dispelled by their struggles in the lion dance, though. We found out that Larry had actually injured himself, which you do get a little bit of a tease of, right? Like in the 3-team struggle to the pit stop, you do hear Larry say like, my leg, as he's going up the stairs. These people in stairs. And so that was definitely a contributor to what ultimately ended up happening.
Yeah. And I think they are a certain casting type, but I think they buck a lot of those stereotypes because even though they had never been out of the country, they were very well traveled and they were very, very smart. I think like they had from talking to them, they had a really good sense of strategy and they knew the show inside and out. And I think like given a couple more legs, they might've been contenders, but they really didn't have that room. And having the fork in the road, of course, you're losing twice as many teams.
Yeah, so that's the other thing that I've seen Lewis from season 34 argue, Jess. I could see why some people feel, a little bit of the unfairness from Mark and Larry, that were this a tried and true detour. They finished in 8th place, really, out of 14 teams. How do you feel about that?
I see the point of that, but I don't necessarily agree because I think you're starting with 14 teams. Already, that's 2 more teams bare minimum than you would have had in any other season. So these people are extra. They're already on borrowed time. And I think you have to know that there's going to be some difficult cuts. And having 2 teams go, it's not the same as like, I think it was the Jenna and Ethan season where they show up, like a team gets eliminated and they're like, oh yeah, surprise, another team is getting eliminated. It's not, I would say arguably it's a little bit better than that. Or the one where they had 12 teams and one of the teams got cut in LA at the starting line. You got to go to Hong Kong. You got to run a whole leg of the race. I think they got what they came for. They seemed very happy and satisfied with the time they had there.
Yeah.
Really great attitudes. But I think this fork in the road it didn't automatically screw every single person who did the opera task. And I like that for it as well. Like there were some choices you had to make and They made a choice, and I don't think their choice was necessarily, I don't think the existence of the fork in the road per se, like if they'd gotten where they'd gotten and they'd chosen a task, do we know that they would have finished in the middle of the pack?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why they took the singing, right, was Larry was saying, like, we didn't even know how to pronounce the street names by the time we got to the fork
Yeah,
in the road. So, like, I don't want to say more Cantonese than I need to at this point.
right. And you also, like a normal detour, you know, we can spin this out. We can make it very results oriented. We can make it very, we can do the sliding doors universe where this is just a detour, and you have teams looking. They don't know who's on the other board. They have to go only on the quote of the sing and dance, and they don't have any idea who else is there or whether or not one task is markedly easier or harder than the other.
Jess, you talked a little bit about, their strategy and how sound of mind they were. Did you hear a bit about what Mark and Larry were able to pull off with the other teams during their downtime?
I did not hear this, Mike. I would like to know.
All right, here's a little bit of an inside scoop. You can check out my interview at parade.com. So, Mark and Larry decided to troll the other teams a little bit. They were talking a little bit on like this first day before the starting line, and they had seen that one of Bernie or Kerrigan was like listening in. Like clearly they were trying to pick up some sound bites as to like what their strategy is going to be. And so they decided to pretend that Larry was somebody famous. They said like, "Oh my God, I can't believe no one's recognized you yet." And so
That's
they
brilliant.
told it to the right person at the right time, and it spread like wildfire that Larry was just somebody famous. And so apparently they said it was something that continued after their time on the race. So
That's
yeah, a
brilliant.
little bit of a claim to fame mixed in with your amazing race here.
That's, that feels like something that, you and I would not have the luxury of being able to do that on The Amazing Race, but it's something I feel like this is very Bloom energy.
Yes, exactly. Like we need like an undercover celeb of putting on the fake beard and the bald cap and going on The Amazing Race. Like, haha, you wouldn't have known I was this person the entire time.
Yeah, or like, it's just a matter of time before somebody figures out where they've seen me before.
Exactly. So I kind of wish we'd see that. Obviously, a lot to cram into the 90 minutes, but I think speaks to the fun qualities that Mark and Larry brought. And again, I hope this first time out of the country for Larry was not necessarily the last. Let's go to Sing here. Let's talk about our top team from Sing, Alyssa and Josiah. And look, full disclosure, I'll admit, Jess, for like the first half of this episode, I was like, okay, this is going to be our like kind of rote, kind of white bread couple that seem very, cohesive, very together. And we've got a little bit of like a fun drama mask, comedy mask thing going on, at least in the way Josiah describes the two of them.
Yeah, I love the way that he describes them as balancing each other out. And I think that'll be a very fun dynamic. And especially like I feel like the gender roles are kind of flipped here. Like it's usually you have the more laid back of the two is not usually the woman.
Yeah, you have the more intense type A guy, and then the woman that is just like making sure that she's
grounding him and reining him in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's cool to have that sort of reversal and to have them be so upfront about it as well. And some fun lines from Alyssa and Josiah, right? About like they took Sing not only because other teams were taking Dan's, but because like if you get enough Yingling in them, they could kill it at karaoke.
Yeah, I mean these guys seem like they'd be a fun hang, right?
Oh, 100%. So hopefully we get many more opportunities to hang with them. But just we need to talk about who might have been, I haven't, calculated screen time or anything, but I would say the most shown team of the episode. And I think one to watch for many reasons. Give me your thoughts on Jonathan and Anna.
Whew. Okay. Yes. Now, I want to disclaim everything that I'm about to say here by saying that when you go on The Amazing Race, millions of people are going to see you on the worst day of your life. And they are going to form opinions that may or may not be accurate based on several isolated conversations they see you have with your partner that may or may not inform what their day-to-day dynamic is like. This is a pressure cooker. It's a different environment. It brings out a side of you that you might not know. That being said, I kind of love it when we are watching, when we're looking at cast photos and, you know, getting what we can based on the very little amount of information we have to go on. And we don't know which team is going to be the team of the season, like the one we call, you know, like when we go back and we're looking at back at the seasons and we say that was the Tyler and Corey season, or that was the Green Team season, that was the, you know, that was the Rob and Amber season. That one we kind of knew that was going to be the case, but you know what I'm saying? Like this is going to be the team that we think of when we think about season 37. Like this is the one. These guys are the stars, and it's not necessarily a good thing. They have a lot of energy. They are very intense. They take things very personally. They have no poker face, and this was the part that I found intensely relatable. You see them, they have a brilliant move. They get out in front of everybody by getting on a ferry before everybody else, and then the other teams catch up. And the moment that the other teams catch up and they're sitting in the ferry terminal, neither one of them has any poker face whatsoever. And they're just like sitting here like, and this is how I would be on Amazing Race. Like for the one episode that I'd be on it, like you would know what I was thinking all the time because I have no poker face. Like you see it on my face, like I can't pretend I'm happy about something I'm not happy about.
Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting is that Jonathan and Anna in one episode express the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, but like the agony of defeat was having the other teams catch up to them or like finishing in second place amongst their group of teams. I mean, we should have noted from the get-go when the two of them are the first to buy a ticket for a plane out of LA, and Jonathan dashes down the airport
sprints
line.
The entire length of the airport and comes back. And I'm like, wait, aren't you supposed to stay less than 20 feet from your partner at all times?
Yeah, or like, wait, you're supposed to fly there. You don't need to run there, Jonathan. But like, it was a harbinger for this intensity that they bring. And Phil talked to me about these two in particular, again, in the preseason, and cautioned that he says that Jonathan is, quote, the hardest on himself of anybody that I can think of who's ever been on the race. And, you know, I think back, Jess, to the opener of season 5, when Colin Gwynn sits there and says, I might be the most intense person who's ever been on The Amazing Race. And I was like, haha, you're just one of the many, you know, road dating couples this season. I'm sure everybody says that. And he very much proved his point. He called his shot. I do have a little bit of concern for Jonathan and Anna here, especially on Jonathan's side, considering, again, the reaction he had to finishing in second place. Like he very much takes the if you're not first, you're last moniker and wears it on the chin.
Yeah. And, you know, we were joking last season about Vinny and Amber, who weren't, I would say, like they were like a fraction as intense as this. We were joking that they were time traveling amazing racers from the early 2000s. I think we got another like season 5 or 6 era team.
Oh boy, Jonathan's famously from that era are not great.
Yeah, I think Jonathan as a name on The Amazing Race. I can think of like one other Jonathan that's been on there's been a few, but like
Jonathan Knight, we mentioned him before, right?
Yes, Jonathan Knight, yeah. And there was a I think one of the a cappella singers from season 17 was named Jonathan. There was a Chris and John in very early season, but of course, when you say Jonathan and Amazing Race in the same sentence, you are usually talking about season 6 Jonathan, who is not one that anyone should strive to emulate. But I feel like I don't think these two are like that. I don't think that is their dynamic. I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with their relationship. I think their bond will be very strong, but I think we are going to see a level of intensity maybe not seen since those early seasons.
I would agree with that, but their story is also incredibly interesting, Jess, in that, you know, they sort of went their separate ways, quite literally separated for a year, and the thing to bring them together, The Amazing Race. They sort of bonded with each other again over their mutual love for the show, and then they found that love for each other once more, and it's all been copacetic since.
I mean, The Amazing Race is a very powerful connector, Mike. We know that.
Very true, very true. Though I do wonder in the moment if they're like, all right, you love the show, I love the show, we want to do this together. I mean, again, to your point, the road of The Amazing Race has been fraught, even going back to the first season, of these couples that like kind of worked out their differences while on the race together, either as exes or in a very precarious situation. I don't think they entered the race in that situation in the vein of like a Frank and Margarita, but I'm really intrigued to see them because at the same time, like they showed a lot of great capacity in this episode. Again, they were killing the first half, and it really just came down to like, them getting to the fork in the road late and being like, making again a very good informed decision of being like, shit, well, we're good dancers, but there's like 5 teams already dancing, so let's do sing. And being able to jump up several places because of that. But I don't know. There's some red and yellow flags, I would say, that might come from their reaction to some of the quote unquote misfortunes that they've experienced. And we'll see if and when that powder keg blows.
Yeah, I think it's grace under pressure, we say, is something that's really important on The Amazing Race. And there's some teams that just have zero chill about it.
All right. Next up, Scott and Lori, another team that got a good pop to it. I think giving a bit of like a holderness realness of like, hey, these are some fans of the show. They're married parents. We talk a little bit about their testosterone laden environment, and they were able to hold with the pack again, despite their age. There was that big to do, right? Just about Lori being able to be alongside some of these younger, fitter people and climbing to the top with the rest of them.
Well, I think the two of them have done some work to prepare. Like you can tell,
Yeah.
these are super fans. These are people that know what the demands of the race are going to be, and they rose to meet the demands. And something that I thought was interesting about them, like they show some old family photos of Scott and Lori, and it is clear that the two of them have gotten into ridiculously good shape since the time those photos were taken. And I wonder if it was like specifically because of Amazing Race.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure how long ago the photos were, but I actually think also Jesse Tannenbaum casting Scott and Lori was an incredible decision, not only because of their personalities and fandom, but like now this is a dynasty. Like if you book Scott and Lori, Amazing Race 38, just bring the 2 oldest sons on. Next season, the next 2 oldest sons. You basically have cast the next 5 seasons of The Amazing Race by just bringing in various configurations of this family.
Right. And if one of them turns out to be like super good at it, they end up on the challenge and they end up on the traders. And then you like put somebody in the ecosystem who can kind of be like one of those algae blooms of, like your cousin Algae Bloom.
Algae Bloom, yes.
Yeah, Algae Bloom, yes.
Good close relative of mine.
But it's funny, like there have been people that I have met in my life, and I've looked at them and I've said, the two of you should be on The Amazing Race. And this is one of those teams, like if I met them out in the world, I'd be like, how have you not been on The Amazing Race yet? Like they exude Amazing Race, don't they?
Absolutely. So we shall see how much that's going to take them in the game, hopefully away from that household for a little bit while the boys can, have their own boys' days to celebrate here. Let's talk about Pops and Jeff. They of the massive biceps, but we love parent-child teams here, and they certainly showed off their physicality and also getting to show off one of my favorite things with these Amazing Race costume tasks, which is like the big macho men having to get in makeup and perform.
And they rolled with it. They were totally cool with it. I did love the negotiations of like, are you going to be in the male costume or the female costume? And Jeff realizing, oh, I just had my dad dress up as the girl, and I hope he's okay with that. And he was. It was fine. Yeah. It was good.
I feel like the concept of father-son lumberjack sounds like a CBS comedy that would air after The Amazing Race on Wednesday nights.
After The Amazing Race is nothing. Like you have to go to bed now after The Amazing Race because it's like 3 a.m. at this point. Sure, it certainly felt like it anyway. This was actually, Mike, we might as well say so. I did go on Croqueta chat with Lewis and Michelle, and I was not the one they wanted to talk to, though. They
you were the conduit.
Like I didn't give my winner pick. I don't know if I have a winner pick, honestly, but they said we would like you to bring George onto our podcast to announce who his winner pick is, because for the uninitiated, my son George, he's 8 years old. He has correctly predicted from the time he was a toddler. He has predicted the last 6 Amazing Race winners based on almost nothing, based on watching 5 minutes of the show or looking. Last season, it was in the case of looking at a cast photo, pointing out Ricky and Cesar and saying, those guys are going to win. And he is amazing at it. And so we're wondering if he's going to make it 7 for 7, but this is the team that he picked.
Wow. Okay. George Stradamus speaks again. I mean, listen, if there's a lot of chopping and physical tasks coming up, then he will have made the right choice yet again. And look, again, I think this is a fairly wide open field, especially only one leg in, and they seem fine. I don't really see any huge red flags with them yet.
No, they're competent. They seem like they have a great bond. I don't see them arguing with each other that much. And of course, they are ridiculously buff. So I think I like the pick. It's a good pick.
All right, let's move into the back half of some of these singing teams. Han and Holden, another team that we didn't see that much of. You know, Han does express in one of these early first minute packages of like, you know, he's very annoying in all caps, but it seemed like they were getting on. I did like their choice, again, banking on personal experience to be like, well, we know Vietnamese, so that will make hopefully pronouncing this Cantonese better, and worked out pretty well for them. Though, again, I think some of the unfortunate stakes that were removed from the fork in the road concept is that once Courtney and Jasmine decide on dance, as Jeff ends up talking about actually in a talking head, all the other teams that sing can kind of take a breath because they know that there's a very good chance, barring any catastrophe, that they're safe.
Yeah, they knew there was a team way out in the back, so they could sort of take their time with it.
Yeah. So any thoughts on Han and Holden from the premiere here, Jess?
Didn't get a lot from them. They're very young.
Yes, they are.
I think sometimes that is an asset and sometimes it's a liability, but I think it remains to be seen because we just haven't gotten enough of them yet.
So here's our second to last team that, again, wasn't really in any danger, though they were trying to show us, I don't know if it was intrigue, Jess, or foreshadowing as to what fate might befall Melinda and Erica in the future, where they either got the wrong directions or they weren't understanding the directions, so they were running around for a bit. They are able to eventually get turned in the right direction and go to the pit stop. But do you have anything to say about this mother-daughter pairing?
I like that. I liked their wandering around all over the streets of Hong Kong looking for the pit stop when everybody else was getting into cabs. That was entertaining. But also, did you catch the roadblock? Did you catch I don't know which one of them was doing the roadblock, but I should look this up because I'm supposed to be an authority, but I'm not going to because it's immaterial. She almost like flips over backwards and loses her shoe on the way back down.
Oh, yeah.
That was entertaining, and it was kind of a fun slapstick moment in an otherwise kind of, bun-free challenge.
Oh, and that's got to be awful too, because like then her sock gets wet or her shoe gets wet, and she has to run around with those sopping wet shoes all day.
Yeah, and they did way more running than anybody else. So I hope they had dry socks.
That's very true. Yeah,
yeah.
They're like, oh, we assume this is on foot. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, you could see it. I think the problem was you could see the building from there, and they thought, well, we can see it, but no, that was not the case. It's not a good idea.
Well, last but certainly not least, let's get into our second team eliminated in this episode. Jackie and Lauren had a very heartwarming story, of course, that their mom always wanted to travel after she retired, but she got diagnosed with Parkinson's, so they're kind of doing it on her behalf. And again, Jess, it was sort of like just this very odd space to live in, where like we would talk about the competition, and then we just occasionally check in with them that are kind of like on their own, doing their own thing. But at the same time, it was this very odd headspace that I don't think we've experienced a lot on The Amazing Race, especially in the premiere, where like they were so out of it, but they had so many concentrated emotional moments around their sort of, foregone conclusion in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I feel like we almost saw them run an entire season of The Amazing Race in one episode.
Yeah, or like they got like a as part of their vacation package, like, when you get to do like an Amazing Race themed tour of all the sites of Hong Kong by yourself.
Almost as if the fork in the road was not a split into two, but a split into three.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love them. I'm sorry that they got kind of a streak of rotten luck. I think they would have been so much fun. They were such a great interview. Like I encourage everybody when my exit interviews go up. You can listen to them. They're going to be great to listen to, but I also urge you to go and watch them on YouTube, because Jackie in particular, a lot of times she says more in a facial expression than she does in her words.
Yeah. So let's get into, again, they faced a lot despite the fact that they were sort of the team that was set up to go, from our perspective, pretty much from like a third of the way through the episode. So Jackie and the stairs. Now, look, again, what she underwent, especially when she explained after the fact, does seem quite traumatizing. To injure yourself to the extent of requiring surgery. I could understand why, and especially to your point with the stairs being so slick that you were just automatically jumping to the worst case scenario of what might happen should you slip here. On the other hand, I will admit, when I first hear Jackie say, like, I've got a thing with steps, my mind at least initially went to Mika and Kanan and the water slide of it all back in
Mm,
Amazing Race 15 before I got some backstory to it.
yeah. I mean, we never got the backstory on that, honestly. But yeah, I was a little bit worried, but it's also, I think Lauren made the really good point that everybody has that thing. And to
Yeah.
some people, it might seem like a ridiculous thing to have, but everyone's got one. And if you can see somebody overcoming theirs, it might make it more likely, whether yours is objectively, by some metric, less understandable or more understandable. Everybody's got that thing, and you can make a step toward overcoming that thing by watching someone else overcome theirs.
Yeah, one step at a time. And I totally agree. I absolutely loved what she said as they were going down, which is it may not be stairs, but it will be something for someone else. And you're going to help them overcome that fear just by doing it. And yeah, it does show that, like, for some people, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe you're afraid of stairs. But I'm sure some people would look at something you're afraid of and feel the same kind of incredulous way. And it doesn't necessarily matter what your fear is, it's the entire activity of overcoming it. And that was also my general thought with this team is, look, to your earlier point, I would say that the Amazing Race by and large is not supposed to be this snapshot of what your relationship is like, because it's an incredibly pressurized environment. I imagine you're not always going to be in an environment where you are racing around the world with this person with $1 million on the line. So it's not going to display prominently how you interact with them on a day to day. But this is a case where I kind of felt that was the case, where, like, Lauren was very supportive to Jackie in the moment, especially when you have this kind of mind body disconnect again of being like, I do not want to go down here for fear of my life, but I also know this is a race where we have to keep going. And Lauren was that partner that was like, we will keep going at the pace that you want to. What matters is that you keep moving, not only for the safety of our race, but for the safety of your own mental health. And so it was like a really cool glimpse into the very special relationship that these two have.
Yeah, it's really sibling goals, honestly.
And the other part of that is Lauren gets her own sort of a moment to become verklempt, right? As she struggles with a lot of the slickness that comes with climbing this tower. Again, they're an entire ferry behind, though they did reveal in my interview that they actually had just missed out on catching a ferry by 2 minutes from the other team. So again, as much as we thought the die was certainly cast early on, unlike the die that Carson and Jack are rolling, like, for all we know, had they caught up and got on that ferry, this could have been a very different, more competitive race for them. But Lauren was clearly having a very difficult time. And, like, once she gets to the top, it just kind of all gets let loose. And again, this is something you expect to see, like, after someone has undergone this veritable exodus of a difficult task, or like whether the fatigue has caught up to them by the final 6, final 5, final 4, even in the finale. Very rarely do we see this type of reaction come from accomplishing a task in the premiere of The Amazing Race.
Yeah, which I think speaks to what a strong premiere it was. I
Yeah.
think
And I
we were
think, and I
able to
think,
have that moment.
and I think also as well, Lauren expressed this to me that, like, this was also the culmination of kind of her fandom, and that there was something tactile about the fact that this was the first out and out task that they needed to complete, right? Where it's like, go get your clue, get a hand on the envelope. And so I think for her, it was just a lot of emotions pouring in at once, like the rain around her, that
Mhm.
it kind of just all released in that moment. And I will say again, it was very visceral, but there was also the very fun and funny image of her being lowered down and just like lying back like she has, passed out at the top, just crying the entire time out of joy.
Yeah, it was really lovely, and you could tell, like, they really got the most out of every moment. And Mike, of course, they told me that they are longtime RHAP listeners
Oh,
and
really?
very excited to be talking to me earlier, and I'm sure also excited to talk to you. And that just kind of made me think, Mike, somewhere out there, somebody listening to this podcast is gonna be on The Amazing Race in the future.
That's
Isn't that, and it's happened so many times before, and it's gonna happen again, and like you're out there, you're gonna get cast for the Amazing Race, and you're listening to it now, and I think that's wild.
Well, listen, if you think you have what it takes, apply to be on The Amazing Race. You heard Phil's call to action. Be like the Jackie and Laurens behind you, the soon-to-be racers that will be in front of you. And of course, we are appreciative of any and all people who listen to our ridiculous content, talking about this ridiculous show that I'm so excited is back. Jess, any other things you want to highlight from this jam-packed hour-and-a-half premiere?
I mean, this was a lovely premiere. I feel really good about the season. I feel really good about our coverage this season. We're gonna have fun. I think I'm excited to see the return of the intersection next week, which is something like, despite the fact that the intersection was a centerpiece of the most poorly designed leg in all of Amazing Race history, and the elimination of one of my all-time favorite teams. When deployed correctly, the intersection can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so let's forecast this a bit, Jess, because I imagine there are some people that have come in that don't know what this is. I believe it's only shown up in the US version in Amazing Race 10, 11, and 16 for a hot second. So what is an intersection? What can we expect from next week's episode?
I think for a portion of the leg next week, you will see teams have to team up with one another. You will have to pair up with another team and compete essentially as a team of 4. And so that can be good if you pair up with a strong team, you can stay out in front, and it can be bad if you pair up with a weak team, and it can be devastating if you are the second to last team to arrive and you're stuck with who you're stuck with.
Yeah, and also I believe there is sort of an element to it in line with like kind of the yield and the U-turn, which is like you also can only pick a team that is there with you at the same time.
Right.
So it can create drama on one side of things where it's like, okay, there are 3 teams, 2 have to pair up. What do they do? And then there's also, to your point, some of the unfortunate circumstances that speaks to maybe some tragedies that have happened in the past, to your earlier point, where one team is stuck waiting for the last place team to arrive and then compete alongside each other and also against each other. And it should hopefully be the beginning of what Phil teased to Dalton Ross as maybe a bit of a drama-filled season as well. So I'm very excited to see what teams pair up, if it's going to lead to some conflict early on, and who is going to be eliminated next, as we are going to Japan from Hong Kong. In the meantime, Jess, I know we've talked a bunch about your interviews with the 2 teams that were eliminated. Anything else you want to plug?
Right now I'm doing this, Mike, and I'm living my life. You can find me. We are starting to cultivate a really good Amazing Race community over on Blue Sky. So you can follow me there, Jess Liese. And then you can always follow me over on Instagram at Haymaker Hattie. There's a lot less cogent Amazing Race one-liners in my Instagram feed, but I'm happy to reach out, have anybody reach out any way they want to. And of course, you can check out my exit interviews with both of the eliminated teams. They're going to also be in the feed and on YouTube. So definitely check those out. And of course, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts and or YouTubes.
That's the thing. You want to make sure in this podcast in particular, if you are new to these Amazing Race streets, I wear stupid, ridiculous costumes every week. So if you ever needed the initiative to subscribe to our YouTube channel at robhasawebsite.com/YouTube, let that be your initiative that you will roll for. And I'll also mention as well, Jess will be the guest on the RHAP B&B.
Oh, yes. Of course. Forgot that was happening.
Yeah, of course.
Got a couple of drinks in me last night, and Mike was like, "You want to be on the B&B?" And I'm like, "I guess."
Exactly. I know, the right time and the right place. Of course, preceding the premiere of The Amazing Race was episode 2 of Survivor 48, a big one. And so I'm excited to have Jess in alongside Liana and myself as we have our own intersection, in a manner of speaking, to talk through Jess's thoughts on the season so far and everything to come. And of course, I'm doing Exit Press as well over at Parade. Got to talk with Mark and Larry and Jackie and Lauren as well. Check those out. Again, if you want to find out more about Larry and Mark tricking everyone into thinking that Larry was a bearded in disguise celebrity, check that out. Very excited to be talking more about these teams all season long and with these teams. So make sure you stay right here as we watch these teams go elsewhere. Next week, going to Japan to face off in the intersection. Let us know your thoughts. What teams do you think have what it takes to go all the way in this moment? What did you think of the debut of the Fork in the Road? Do you want to see it pop up again, perhaps under different circumstances? Let your thoughts be heard. I always love the beginning of an Amazing Race season as we all kind of pile into the proverbial plane here and fly off to parts unknown to see what the next season will bring for us. That's going to do it for this week's episode, breaking down the premiere of The Amazing Race 37. Jess and I will be back next week breaking down episode 2. Until then, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.
This is RHAP. We know reality TV.